Hello everyone in CSC-115. We are still in Module 5. This lecture is to help you get up to speed with text files using for loops to process text files, and also trying a little bit of string formatting with file data. So first off, let's talk a little bit about what a text file is. In order to understand how computers store information, you have to really kind of have an understanding of the Ascii character set. Now, later computers are using something called Unicode, but this Ascii chart's a good introduction into the way things are stored. So I went to AsciiChart.com, and you can see it's presented me with the decimal Ascii chart. Okay, and the letter A, when you type a letter A, it's actually saved as a 65 in decimal. Now, most of the folks that work with file storage and everything look at it in hexadecimal, which is base 16, as opposed to decimal, which is base 10. So I'm going to switch the Ascii chart over to hexadecimal so you can see what the numbers look like over there. And remember, with hexadecimal, we have the numbers 0 through 9, and once we get to where we need to write 10, instead of writing 10, we write A. For 11, we write a B, and so on. So let me switch over to hex here, and you can see. So in hexadecimal, the capital letter A is stored as a hex 41. Now look at how it counts here in hex. Starts at 0, we get to 9, and then we use A for 10, B for 11, C for 12, D for 13, E for 14, F for 15. Now remember, we said hexadecimal is base 16, so once we get to the number 15, that's when we write a 10 in hexadecimal. Okay, so I'm going to leave this hexadecimal chart up, and I'm going to show you how information is stored inside a file. So I'll go over to Windows, because I know most of you folks have Windows, and I'll I'll open up, well, let's just create a new text file. Notepad is the program that we use on Windows to work with text files, and I'll say this is line 1, line 2, line 3. Okay, so this text file's got 3 lines in it. I'll save it out there in my downloads folder, and we can just save it as Windows text file. How's that? It's going to tell me it already exists because I have evidently done one in the past. Okay, so there's our Windows text file. So let's look at it with a little program. This is a free program that you can get. It's HXD. It's a hex editor. And so let's open up that file that we just created in downloads. It's called Windows text file. So right there it is. Gonna open it up. This over here on this side where I'm pointing is hex. Over here on this side, it's showing it to us in the normal characters. So as you can see, the first letter here is an L. When I highlight it over here on the right, it shows me what it's stored in hex. It says it's a 6C. Now that's a lowercase l, so if we go back here and look at the L right here, the little l, you can see that it is in fact showing on a chart as a 6C. So one thing that we need to understand about this is that, you remember how I went to a new line? I typed in line 1 and I hit enter, and I typed in line 2 and I hit enter, and I typed in line 3. Well, on Windows, and Windows is the only operating system that does this. Everybody else does it a different way. So on Windows, when you save a text file, it puts a 0D and a 0A on the end of that line. Now we couldn't see those. Here I am in Notepad, and you see that it's not showing those to us, is it? But we know they're there because it jumped down to a new line. So when you create a text file in Windows, it puts a 0D and a 0A every time you hit enter. Okay? Every time you hit enter, it does that. So if we go back to the Ascii chart here, you can see that a 0A is a line feed, and a 0D is a carriage return. So A is a line feed, D is a carriage return. So if we go back and look, it's typing a carriage return and a line feed every time we hit enter. Carriage return right here and a line feed every time we hit enter. Now if you create a text file on anything else other than Windows, it doesn't do this. I'm going to show you the solar production file that we're going to use here in Project 7 and also in this demonstration, just so you can see how I created that solar text file on Linux. And of course, if you did it on Mac OS X, it would be the same way, or on Unix, it would be the same way. So I'm going to open that file up. Okay. Now, if you look at that file, and here's where I'm getting that file, on the checklist for week 10, if you scroll down, you can see it's talking about an example program. It says as the first step for creating Project 7, read and run the example program. So here is that solar production text file, and basically what it has is it has how much electricity I made here on the farm for each month of the year. Okay, and it has a month, and it has a year, and then it has a kilowatt hour value. So that's kilowatt hours of electricity that was made each month. And I saved that as this text file, solarproduction.txt. And so if we look at this file, it only has one dot between each new line. Whereas this Windows file right here, you notice it has two dots. Remember we said Windows saves a carriage return and a line feed? Linux, Unix, and every other computer system just saves a line feed. When you go to a new line, it saves a line feed. Okay? Now they've changed Notepad on Windows in, I guess, about 2 or 3 years ago. They changed it where if you open up one of these files from Mac or Linux or Unix, it now will jump down to a new line. It used to be that if Windows didn't see both of these characters, the 0D and the 0A, it would just show you all that information on one line and it wouldn't be dropping down. Let's open up. I've already downloaded that Solar production text file. Let's open it up on Notepad and look at it. Okay, open, and you can see that it is smart enough now. Notepad has finally gotten smart enough to where it's showing us that file with everything dropping down a line the way we created it on other operating systems. Okay, so just keep that in mind in Python. In Python, when we save a file or write a text file out with Python, if we write out a text file, it does not put this carriage return. It just puts, every time you put a new line character, a \n, it puts that 0A in the file. Okay, so alright, so now that we understand kind of the makeup of that text file, we can go out to the lecture here and look at creating a program with a for loop to process this file. And if you're at all interested, first put Solar in here on the farm 10 years ago, and the historical record of everything that has ever been produced is right here on the PV Output website. This is today when I'm making the video. This site is actually in Australia, and you can see that they do the dates differently in Australia. That's the day, the month, and the year. And you can see right now that we're making about 7,000 watts of electricity. The red line is how much electricity we're using, and you can see that that we're overproducing today. It's hazy. This number would be a little bit higher. So anyway, that link's out there if you're at all interested in solar, and I would encourage you to be interested in solar for the future. So alright, so I've scrolled down through this lecture, and here's a sample Python program to process that solar file with production in it. Now, some things I want to point out. This is an open statement. When you open a file, you have to tell Python whether you want to open it for read or write. If you're not going to change something in the file, then you put an R there. This is this variable right here that I named Solar is just our file pointer variable. File pointer. It holds this file pointer that we can use, this file pointer object that we can use to process this file. And then look at the for loop here. It says for, and this is a variable that we're creating right here. It's called A-line in Solar. Solar is our file pointer. Okay. Now what this does is it splits that line. Now remember, we're in the chapter on strings, so you need to understand that when we read this line right here with our for loop, it actually comes in as a Python list that, a string. It comes in as a Python string that we can split up into have it split. The split right here tells Python to take this line, and everywhere that there is an empty white space, to split it, chop it, into a list. And so we get a list that has a bunch of items, however many items there were in that file. So let's go ahead and start Tawny and work with this, but just know that before we can work with it, you have to download this Solar production file. And Chrome may try to open this up with the text editor. So what you need to remember is, first off, Firefox works better for downloading stuff. But if you're going to insist on Chrome, you're going to have to make sure that you right-click and save this somehow. I'm saying save the link. And I'm going to put it in a lecture here for Module 5 that's called For Loop Text Files. Okay? Now, this is important. You've got to have this text file here saved in the same exact spot where you're creating your Python program. I'm going to say that one more time because I get all kinds of emails when folks start working on this, that this file that you're going to process has to be in the same folder as your Python program, wherever that is. So I'm going to put my Python program in this folder called For Loop Text Files Lecture. So I'm going to save this text file in the same spot. Now, just to make sure, I'm going to go out here and I'm going to look at in that folder, and there's the file. Okay, and if I double click on it on Linux, you see it opens it up, and so it's got a white space between the month and the year and the Solar production. This is an integer, right? Well, down here it's a float. So we probably want to go ahead and change whatever we split up into floats. So this would be a string, this would be a float. Okay, so all right, so let's go ahead and make that Python program. I'm going to start Tawny up. Okay, and we'll clear that out and we'll create a new file and save it as, and I'm gonna put it in the For Loop Text Files Lecture here, and I'll just call this Solar. How about we call this For Loop Demo, For Loop Text File Demo. How's that? .py. Make sure that you put the py on the end of it. Okay, so now I've got this Tawny file created. So I can take my code right here and copy it and paste that into Tawny. Tawny's right here. Paste that in. Okay. Now, right here, when we have this line, values equals a line split, okay, this is actually going to take whatever line we read, and what I think I'll do with this, just so you can see what's coming in, let me get my indentation fixed here. Remember, when you paste stuff, you've always got to worry about indentation. First, let's just do this. And that's all I'm going to do. I'm going to cut the rest of that out. Okay. So here we're opening the Solar production file for read. And here we're closing it. Okay. Make sure that you remember to close that file. If you don't close it, you could corrupt a drive at some point. So I've already saved this Python file, so I'm going to run it, and you can see everything that's coming out right here. Okay. Now, why is it double spaced? Do you remember when we looked at this data with the hex file hxd editor? You saw that it had a new line character on the end of it, right? So we're actually reading that new line character and printing it. So we're dropping down to here where I've got my cursor right now. We're dropping down to right here. And then what does the print statement do? It tells Python to jump down to yet another line. So we're actually we're reading a carriage return line feed and printing it. And then we're printing, and the print does the new line character on the end of that. So if you want to suppress this double spacing, then if you go back and look in the lectures in Module 1, we talked about how to change things about the print statement. We can override what happens with the print by putting this comma and end equals. And now this says, hey bud, when you print this, don't print a new line character. Just don't do anything. I put empty stuff in between there. So the print statement now is not going to put a new line character anytime it prints. What does that mean? Well, this file right here already has the new line characters on each line, so we'll still drop down to a new line. It just won't be double spaced. So here's how it looks now that I put that end equals on there. Okay, so now let's talk about, instead of doing this, let's actually split that, and I'll do this. A list equals a line dot split. Split is a string function in Python, and it says everywhere that you see a white space character or a new line, to split it into another item in a list. So I'm gonna do that, and then I'm gonna print a list. Okay, so now what you should see is each time we read a line, you'll see what actually exists in that list variable when we do this split. Okay, so let's run it. Look what it's doing now. It's given us a Python list, because this is where I printed a list. That the A list comes from splitting the A line. Okay, so this is A line 0, because we start counting at 0 with list and strings, by the way. Remember that from the strings lecture. So this is A list 0. This is A list 1. Now in the example that's out there, they actually used values. Okay, so let's just change it to values so that it matches up. And you can see, so this is values 0, this is values 1. Okay, so if we wanted to print just the month and the year, we could do that. Instead of saying values and printing the whole thing, we could put a square bracket and say values 0. Okay, and now when we run this, look at what we get. Okay, so if you remember when we were printing the whole list here that was values, it had values 0 was the month and the year, and it had the kilowatt hours here, 1290, whatever. Okay, it had this number, okay, in values 1. So this split lets us do exactly what it says, right? Lets us split things out. So if you wanted to see me get into the numbers part of that data, if I run this now, look what I have. So values 1 is the numbers part. All right, so let's continue on then. If we wanted to enhance this a little bit, okay, right here, look at what we're doing to get the kilowatt hours, kWh for kilowatt hours. What are we doing? We're converting whatever we get that's in values 1, and remember values 1 had the numbers in it. So we're taking that value that we read from our text file, we're splitting it, we're getting the numbers part of it, we're changing that numbers into a float, and then we're assigning it to the kilowatt hours. Okay? So once we've got that, then we could print it right here. Okay? This is a variable name, right? kWh. So what's this going to do? It's printing the month and the year that's in value 0. It's going to put a space because of print everywhere it sees a comma, it puts a space. It's going to print the word had. It's going to print another space. It's going to print whatever's in kWh, that float value, right? And then it's going to print another space because there's a comma, and then it's going to print kilowatt hours of generation. So we can take this code and we can put that into our program here, and we can see what it's going to do. Now remember, we've got to fix the indentation because I'm copying that from the web. Okay, so now let's run this again, and you can see it's given me an error because right here when I copied and pasted, I didn't get rid of everything. Okay, let's clear that and run it again. Okay, so you can see there's the month and the year. That's coming from this. Here's the had. That's coming right here. It's got these spaces because of everywhere Python sees a comma, it prints a space. It's printing the kWh right here, kilowatt hours. And then it's printing this text. Okay, so how could we do some string formatting? Well, in the lecture on string formatting, I showed you 3 different ways to do string formatting. 3 different ways. I'm not going to concentrate on the old way because the old way that has the percent signs and all should be going away. I'm going to focus on the new ways of printing things or doing string formatting. So we've got this kilowatt hours value here. Let's say we wanted to print this out with no decimals in it. No decimals. Okay? We could do string formatting right here, and we could create ourselves a format string. Okay? And a format string looks like this. Now, if we're not going to do any formatting at all, okay, if we're doing no formatting, then if you leave those squiggly brackets there with nothing in them, it's saying take this and put it inside there. Now, obviously, we want to do something with it. I think we were saying let's try to print it with no decimals. So you may remember from the formatting lecture that if we're doing the new style formatting, you have to put a colon. Okay? And then let's see, we had total of 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 places is what we wanted to print. And we wanted it to have no decimals, so I'm going to put 4 and a dot and 0. and then I'm going to put an F because we're formatting a float. Okay, we're formatting a float. And look what I get when I run that now. Do you see the 1290? We told it no decimals. We told it to allow 4 places total. And we wanted to format a float. Okay? So this is the new way of formatting. There is a format string that makes it yet a little bit easier to do the formatting. And so we could try that if you want to, doing the very newest that's available with Python 3.6. Let's try doing a new format string. In order to do that, you put an F in front, okay? And then inside the parentheses, instead of having to do all this, you can actually just put the variable name that you want to print inside there. Okay? And then if you want to format it, you can still do this. So let's try doing a format string. That's the very latest and greatest. And you can see that that works as well. And I think this is a little less typing than doing it the other way. Okay, so this is saying put the variable kwh here in this, and then format it in 4 numbers with 0 decimals. Now we could go ahead and do a format string for this whole thing, and it might be a little easier to read. So watch me change this. We said this is our format string here. We could actually do this. We wanted a space there. Remember, it's got to have single quotes. And so now you see I've got my kilowatt hours formatted. I've got a space, and I've got the kwh. And now we could go ahead and do this whole line as a format string. If I put the had in there, okay, whoops, doesn't go inside the squiggly brackets, it goes outside them. Okay, so had with a space, okay, and then if we wanted to put values 0 in there, we could actually do that inside our format string, but we would need another placeholder. Okay, another placeholder, the squiggly brackets. We could put values 0, which has the month and the year in it, right? And values 0 is a string, but we don't necessarily have to tell Python that it's a string if we're just not doing anything with it. So this is I've converted that whole thing into the latest and greatest format string, and let's try it. And you can see that it looks exactly like we were doing before, but we're using the new Python format string. Okay, so if I wanted to get 3 decimal places on kilowatt hours, we know that kilowatt hours is a float. That's why we have the F here. If we wanted to get 3 decimals, then here's the thing. If you want this to be to have 3 decimals in it, you've got to count the decimal point and the 3 and add that to your 4. So I need to make it 8 total and then 3 decimals. And now when I run it, do you see what I have? Do you see where the 8 here came from? This works the same way whether you're doing the format with the parentheses or a format string, but the 8 comes from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The total width right here is 8. And then the 3 decimals here, that's where the 3 comes from. And then the dot right here, we allowed that in our width. Okay? So if you want to format a string, which is what you're having to do in your project, value 0 is a string. Remember that instead of using an F, you need to use an S, okay, for a string. And you can go read the string formatting lecture to see more about formatting strings, and that is also available at pyformat. Let me get my caps lock off. pyformat.info right there. And specifically, if I scroll down, you can see padding and aligning strings. Now, remember, this site, which is the latest and the greatest site, does not show you how to do the new format string. It shows you how to use just the format method of a string. So remember that you can do this the old way, you can do it the new way, or you could do it with an F string like I'm showing you right here. This is an F string because I put a little F outside of this string. Remember that the squiggly brackets are placeholders. And remember that we have to specify our type if we're going to do any specific formatting. Okay? And also remember to close that file. Now, if you're getting some kind of error when you take this code and you can't get it to run, remember what I told you. In that folder, in this folder, wherever you put it, this is my Python program. Look what's in that folder. The solarproduction.txt file here. Okay? So you'll need to know how to do this to do Project 7. And if you have watched this video and look at that material that's right here, okay, you see where I'm clicking, then you have everything you need to do about 90% of the project. And Project 7 is here in Module 5. And you scroll down. Here's Module 5 assignments. Here's Project 7. And you can see that you need to do some string formatting to get the month and the year to be right justified in, I think, a 25 space field. And you need to format the kilowatt hours. Well, actually, you've got to convert the kilowatt hours into megawatt hours. And then you have to print the megawatt hours formatted with 2 decimal places. So that's Project 7. Good luck. And that's the last video for this week of the class.